We are live. I'll just wait for a second for him to join. But Nihal, shall we start? He will join because you are
Sure.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Yeah.
Your schedule.
Warm greetings. Welcome to another session of W for W Foundation. Today we have Wednesdays for Water. But before we get into the session, W for W Foundation is a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective. At Wednesdays for Water, we welcome you to today's session on post-colonial waters in South Asia. The objective of Wednesdays for Water is to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policymakers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues associated with water and the possible solutions people are working on or seeking for. With the success of Wednesdays for Water, we have actually crossed 200 sessions, but much before, we had to expand our water conversations to Friday Waters, which includes Water Talkies, Water Thesis Club, Water Reading Club, Water Arts, and Meet a Maestro, and recently concluded Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water. These are all online sessions, but at the same time, we have been continuously doing in-person, on-site water workshops, water walks and talks, seminars, special courses, and conference panels to continue the water conversations in various possible ways. At W for W, we have one simple motto, and we believe that water conversations are the only way towards water conservation. Do visit our new home, www.w4w.org. Our old home, www.w4w.in, is also active, but we are in a transition to convert our initiative into an institution. Today we have very interesting session, and we are actually preparing for our forthcoming Independence Day on 15th of August in India. But we're expanding our discussion today to post-colonial waters in South Asia. And we'll start the session looking at South Asia and then focus on India about how we are influenced or what we are doing that we call it post-colonial. While India and South Asia have been rich in their traditional water wisdom, which I personally believe are dying a slow death or being married to the contemporary way of water management and governance, we also see a deep impact in the way water management is done. And I'm focusing on India, but we have our speaker also focusing on South Asia. We see that there is a Nehruvian idea of water management and governance with large mega structures when India was making nation building post-independence. But at the same time, a lot of things that we carried from the colonial time. For example, I'm just giving two examples here, the Easement Act, the groundwater as an appendage to land ownership, the caste and class-based water distribution and access. All these things continue, and above all, the bureaucratic institutional structure that also prevailed. Anyway, we are going to have more discussion. We have two esteemed speakers today. Before I invite them to make their pitch or presentation, it's really an honor to invite my old-time friend, Professor Nihal Pereira, to give an overview of how things are in South Asia. But before he does that, a brief biography of his. Professor Nihal Pereira of Ball State University in Muncie, USA, is recognized as a foundational scholar of post-colonial urbanism. Theorizing Asian experience, the leading scholar of Colombo demonstrates that ordinary individuals actively shape lived environments rather than merely reacting to larger structural forces. He's a two-time Fulbright senior scholar in China and Myanmar and has published articles and chapters on gender, race, development, Chandigarh, Dharavi, Gangtok, Gary, just to name a few, and Yangon. Nihal currently teaches courses off the grid in Sinhala and supports universities in India, Sri Lanka, and elsewhere. We know each other since 2005 as co-teachers. Thank you so much, Nihal, for agreeing to do this session. Over to you, and then I invite our second speaker later.
Is it over to me now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mansi, for dragging me into your area of research, and I'm honored. Let me and thank you for everyone who is here. Let me start by saying today's world is largely defined by West European colonialism, an expansion that not only restructured global socio-political systems but also deeply pathologized colonized people's psyches, epistemes, and identities. While it is impossible to understand the post-colonial world without analyzing European interventions, it is equally impossible to fathom modern Europe or its industrialization without accounting for the massive wealth extracted from India. While European expansion drove global progress, its critical flip side is the modern climate crisis. At the root of this crisis lies a manufactured separation between humans and the environment. Treating water as a mere human resource is a distinct European production, and colonialism was the vehicle of its global dispersion. The roots of this transformation are deeply embedded in the development of a West European understanding of the world that sought to categorize the other within it. Prior to this shift, most human societies lived in alignment with nature as an inseparable part. During European expansion, Western thinkers engineered the transition from an organic worldview to a mechanistic dualistic paradigm, serving, severing humans from nature. This intellectual transformation, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, recast the natural world as a passive machine destined to be measured, dominated, and exploited for human progress. By invalidating alternative knowledges, this systematic classification brought the globe firmly under the purview of Western Europe. Through maps, territory was rendered navigable, legible, known, and ultimately conquerable. Maps derive meaning only when employed within this larger imperial matrix of knowledge. This epistemic reworlding of the other remains the most enduring legacy of colonialism. Our contemporary frameworks for conceptualizing water, nature, and humanity are entirely founded upon it. The commodification of land subsequently created the history's largest abstract space, transforming pieces of the earth into private property. Alongside land, plants, water was transformed from a localized shared resource into a centralized engineered instrument of territorial and social control. This process elevated humanity to a position of violent dominance over the environment, pushing along a linear path of progress toward the destructive apex of neoliberalism and the climate crisis. In a deeper sense, water is the lifeblood of the human environment. Early human societies lived near water. Beyond mere utility, the ways in which people viewed, utilized, and related to water became integral to a community's culture, sacred spheres, and artistic traditions. For instance, South Asians traditionally maintain that true cleanliness requires washing with flowing water. Historically, South Asian societies viewed rivers as living goddesses, constructing sacred architecture, including ghats, sacred ponds, and step wells, that seamlessly blend spiritual faith with hydrology. Yet, long before the West adapted Eastern water practices, such as public bathing cultures, or the of the Ottoman Empire, or the sophisticated collective hydraulic engineering of Southeast Asia, Western Europe viewed water through a complex matrix of fear, strict utilitarianism, and spiritual suspicion. Prior to the 19th century development of germ theory, Europeans perceived water as a deadly hotbed of cholera and typhoid. Consequently, under the colonial gaze, water was transformed into a commodity to be engineered, a boundary to be drawn, and a source of disease to be rigidly contained. European colonizers routinely misread the locals' intimate, reciprocal relationship with water, not as spiritual devotion, but as primitive, dangerous, and unhygienic behavior that required Western discipline. Living in closer reciprocity with water, many Asian societies historically maintained hydrological commons rooted in mutual aid. For these communities, water was fundamentally understood as a shared social resource that demanded collective stewardship rather than private exclusionary enclosure. A prime manifestation of this ethos is found in Bali, where rice cultivators organized into autonomous democratic water management cooperatives known as subaks, centered around water temples. Within this system, water distribution was never tied to financial wealth or private land ownership. Instead, it was structurally bound to shared religious calendars, ritual cycles, and collective labor obligations. Similarly, between 1 or 2 millennia ago, Sri Lanka developed a sophisticated hydraulic civilization. Rainwater was captured in massive reservoirs, which fed an intricate network of canals irrigating vast tracts of rice fields. King Parakram Bahu famously captured the ethos of this system, declaring that not a single drop of water should flow into the ocean without first serving humanity. Crucially, this ancient society did not disrupt natural water cycles. Rather, it harvested water through an intimate, advanced understanding of local hydrology. They worked alongside natural topographies, coexisting with ecosystems rather than dominating it or changing the topographies for that matter. Let's move on. Although I grew up immersed in the post-colonial nationalist narratives of Sri Lanka's historical greatness, my deep intellectual attraction to water systems galvanized in Ahmedabad. There I encountered the region's stunning stepwells, subterranean water harvesting structures intricately carved and engineered centuries ago to survive an arid climate. These subterranean spaces demonstrate how a community's specific response to water actively produces culture. The same social production of culture through hydrology is evident in Sri Lanka's historic capitals. As the ancients learned to collaborate with water cycles, they built sophisticated irrigation networks alongside advanced community baths, sanitation systems, and water fountains that still endure today at Sigiriya if you go today. In Ahmedabad, I also observed massive waterfront developments designed strictly for entertainment. Vastrapur, Kankaria were once talavs, or historic ponds, that have been commodified. As I learned from Mansi, historic settlements in the arid Saurashtra region were not merely located near talavs, they were built around them as vital social ecological anchors. Municipal authorities plucked pieces of this heritage out of their historical, social, and environmental context and re-encoded them to fit a modern Europeanized paradigm, stripping away their vital life-sustaining links to local ecosystems and communities. Water does not possess a singular value. When I was in Rome in 2011, a friend, Giulia Fioca, asked if restaurants were trying to sell me bottled water. I nodded. She led me to one of the city's many historic public fountains, drank from it, and urged me to do the same. She explained that Rome has an abundance of free potable water and warned me not to let businesses sell bottled water. While Julia focused on water's use value, the restaurants exploited its exchange value. They are not merely selling water, but plastic bottles. Through this mechanism, corporations produce and reproduce a new consumer habit. Consumer habit, desire, and culture, one that simultaneously generates capital and pollutes the environment with plastic waste. It's like Coca-Cola, they produce their clients. During my second Fulbright in Yangon, I observed how the uncritical adoption of imported consumer lifestyles and values by the emerging middle class actively erodes rather than builds upon local cultural practices. A powerful material manifestation of this tension is the ubiquitous presence of roadside water pots throughout the city. For generations, residents and small merchants have maintained a long-standing tradition of providing free potable water for pedestrians. While traditional clay pots remain common, contemporary variations include recycled plastic containers. Crucially, this localized ethic of the commons is directly challenged within corporate food courts and upscale restaurants, where service workers aggressively push commercialized bottled water and processed sugar beverages. Colonial authorities actively weaponized disc- discourses of sanitation and hygiene, pathologizing native people and their traditional water practices such as roadside bathing or relying on open tanks as diseased and backward. This rhetoric was systematically used to justify violent urban sanitation campaigns, forced evictions, and strict spatial policing. In colonial port cities like Colombo, Hong Kong, Rangoon, and Singapore, the engineering of clean water delivery and wastewater disposal was deliberately utilized to enforce racial hierarchies. Centralized water grids and underground sewage networks were prioritized for European administrative sectors and elite enclaves, such as Royal Lake area in Rangoon and Cinnamon Gardens in Colombo. Conversely, the dense native population centers were systematically left unpiped and underserved, producing deeply segregated urban landscape where access to the water cycle dictated by race and proximity to colonial power. Despite its objective merits, Western science has historically been co-opted to legitimize the myth of European superiority. Colonial discourses were systematically privileged by cloaking them in the authority of scientific neutrality. As historical geography school books frequently illustrate, the white man was framed as the pinnacle of global civilization, a superiority supposedly determined by the temperate climate of Europe. Tragically, post-colonial societies often uncritically absorb the opposite category of the tropical as an inherent marker of difference, completely ignoring its violent colonial production. Instead of seeking genuine epistemic alternatives or building upon merely ad, merely most nationalist discourses merely adopt reactive oppositional stances that mirror the very system they oppose. By failing to deconstruct these foundational categories, nationalists have ultimately reinforced and re-legitimized the colonial discourse. The 2016 The Face of the City Waterfront Initiative in Yangon utilized idealized imagery modeled after London South Bank and the Baltimore waterfront to envision the southern waterfront transformation. In contrast, the most popular public waterfront of Inya Lake functions as an organic multi-use landscape that facilitates both physical reactions and intimate social interaction. It attracts a remarkable diverse demographic, drawing university students, residents, and international professionals for activities ranging from jogging along paved embankments to seeking private social interactions in shaded enclaves, sometimes behind umbrellas. Uh, as night falls, the lakefront transitions into a highly animated festive arena. This environment is dynamically produced by the physical movement of pedestrians, joggers, and mobile vendors. The latter actively circumvent formal restrictions by weaving through the crowds to hawk bottles of water and snacks from portable baskets, visually punctuated by informal vendors who launch colorfully lit toy helicopters and spray soap bubbles into the evening air. These collective subaltern activities successfully transform a highly regulated infrastructure into a vibrant site of popular urbanity or a people's space. relating to my own work. In contrast, the waterfront project, which uncritically imports Western urban design, distances the development from local socio-economic and ecological realities. External actors prioritize the rushed, growth-centric development agenda that serves as a vehicle for gentrification, systematically displacing average citizens and fracturing the city's social fabric. Rooted in the epistemic legacies of the Enlightenment and colonialism, the conceptualization of water as a mere commodity has become the modern authorized discourse. By authorized discourse, I refer to formal institutional management processes and narratives that privilege expert judgment and are heavily backed by state and private investment. And it's clearly seen in Ahmedabad and Yangon. This dominant discourse is systematically hegemonized through its steady propaganda, where international charters, global conventions, urban plans, formal education systems, ultimately marginalizing organic spaces, cultural meanings, historical memories, daily practices, and voices of ordinary people. As the local populace, especially the youth, assimilates into this imported commercialized consumption patterns, water is transformed from a shared social resource into a private commodity, systematically replacing a traditional culture of mutual aid with westernized mall culture. This hypercommodification threatens not only traditional water provisioning, but also other foundational elements of Yangon's living heritage, including indigenous street games like Chinlon, the Kenball, informal neighborhood tea shops, and the organic social spaces that anchor everyday local identity. Okay, let me finish soon. The foundational paradigm of thinking that engineered our current environmental and hydrological crisis is fundamentally incapable of solving them. The same thought cannot solve it. For viable paths towards ecological recovery, we need to look elsewhere. Alternative paths are quietly explored by ordinary people, not necessarily by experts, who operate at the margins of colonial, techno-scientific, and state nationalist discourses. Through their everyday spatial practices, these subaltern actors maintain a lived relationship with the environment, offering localized models of resilience and mutual aid that challenge the hegemony of the global commodity market. I have to connect to my original profession though. Learning by doing, learning by doing serves as the primary strategy. Learning by doing serves as the primary strategy of these people, a methodology that even many highly trained post-colonial professionals employ when abstract theories fail. For instance, architect Lu Tai Ker noted that the first building he designed upon returning to Singapore leaked. When a local woman advised him to cut the windowsill in half, the, the, the fix worked. The universalized science of rain he had mastered at his university in Australia proved utterly inadequate because, as he observed, the monsoon rain in Singapore behaved very differently. Similarly, Charles Correa recalled that once he began his career, he quickly realized that buildings in the subcontinent require a double defense against the elements. The physical environment of India demanded an architectural vernacular distinct from Western models. Western knowledge is not universal, but provincial. There's nothing wrong with that. It was designed for a very specific European social, cultural, and climatic context and a global project of colonialism and imperialism. To consider it universal, that is colonial. The climate crisis may well represent the terminal crisis not only of American hegemony, global capitalism, and European domination, but of humanity itself. Because the very paradigm of thinking that engineered this catastrophe is fundamentally incapable of resolving it. It is imperative that we relearn how to live as an inseparable part of the natural environment, which we are. exploring how ordinary people actively respond to this and other existential challenges. Much of my work on social space investigates how communities learn by doing, consciously moving away from colonial, nationalist, and other mainstream paradigms. Those interested in further exploring these localized alternatives and subaltern practices that I have studied, you can find those in my book, People Spaces. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Nihal, for this enlightening session, as expected from you. Very theoretically grounded and truly what I was looking forward from you.
Oh, thank you.
We'll quickly move to our next speaker, but before I do that, because this whole design of Wednesdays for Water is done for the youth, I wish to introduce to you some faces at W4W, because that will be nice to do that. We have Stacy today from Nairobi, so we are actually managing 4 time zones. So Stacy Githe is our repertoire today. And it will be really nice that both of the speakers really get a chance to speak to her, or other way around, because I actually put our youth at the front. And we also have Dr. Stuti Malhotra, who may or may not, she's testing our shows, may be our new face for Wednesdays for Water in future. So I will be very happy that I am out of the scene and we have young people coming in. We also have Anup Saha, who may take the responsibility of the Friday Waters Thesis Club to invite more youth brigade into this conversation. So I'm really happy with all of you taking step forward and coming to really strengthen these water conversations. We are already the longest water conversation in the world with 450 sessions plus. So we move on with wonderful talk setup for the South Asia. We now go into what's going on in India. We see a lot of big words. And I hope Amitangshu will also help us decode them in the context of India. Professor Amitangshu Acharya is an academic researcher and writer. He is currently Associate Professor of Sustainability at Monash University, Indonesia. He worked as development practitioner and researcher for almost a decade across civil society organizations and research institutes, just to name a few again: Foundation for Ecological Security, Aragyam in India, Ikimod in Nepal, and Akvo in Netherlands. He completed his PhD from the University of Edinburgh as a Leverhulme Trust Scholar, and subsequently worked at IHE Delft Institute of Water Education, which is when I actually got hold of him. And then in between, he transitioned to Indonesia. Amitangshu is committed to public-facing scholarship and has written on water cultures, the climate crisis, and everyday urbanism in The Economist, The Independent, Places Journal, Huffington Post, The Hindu, Indian Express, again, just to name a few. Amitangshu, you heard Nihal, and we are already having this conversation for quite some time, 3 of us. Looking forward to your presentation. Over to you. Thank you. And in between, may I request all of you to please pose your questions and comments in the chat box. You are very welcome to engage with our speakers after this presentation. Over to you, Amitangshu.
Thank you so much, Mansi, and I hope everyone can hear me and see the screen. Perfect. Okay. So it's an absolute honor to be in the same panel with Nihal Pereira. I am so glad, and Nihal, that was such an elegant way you put that argument forward. I don't need to say much after this, but thank you for such a lovely presentation. I thank Wednesdays for Water for putting this together, and this remarkable group that you have created, Mansi, and great to see young people moving in. Fantastic. I will try, and what I'll do, so I will obviously lack that elegance that Nihal brings to this platform. What I'll basically do is try and ground some of the things that he has talked about, and also talk about the contemporary concerns around decolonization that is also emerging in the subcontinent. And before I get into the core argument, which is where I engage with the manifesto that emerges in 1997, I wanted to ask myself, where does a discussion on water begin in South Asia? And it intersects with what Nihal also mentioned. It it begins at the individual intimate space of everyday practice. We know this, that giving water is a sacred act across the subcontinent. It is the basic, the starting point of hospitality. If you enter a home, you are supposed to at least offer a glass of water. That is the bare minimum. Now, at that scale, water connects. It's an intimate form of building connection and kinship networks. But at the same time, if we switch the scale and we take it at a societal level, water also becomes a demarcator of caste difference. When I was doing my research in Sikkim, and Nihal also mentioned Gangtok, Tangka Supa talks about the practice of separation of caste groups through understanding of water, where he talks about Pani Chal Jat, Pani Na Chal Jat, where water, who could share water between who, would define the criteria of caste in a Nepali society in Sikkim. Now, at the same time, when I switch one more level up and I go into this European invention, which is the nation state, which has caused so much trouble in the subcontinent, you suddenly realize this act of sharing and giving water is actually the most contentious aspect of statecraft and relations between states. If you look at the history of relations between Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, you will figure out there's one commonality there, which is the sharing of water. So then, how is it an act which is so critical, so sacred, so intimate to all of us suddenly acquires these new proportions, these new pathologies as we change the scale? So this is what I kind of wanted to start off. And this image on the screen is from an article I wrote in 2018 on the Bhishtis, or the water carriers of Delhi, for the Hindu. The picture was taken by S. Subramaniam. And this act of giving water after Friday evening prayers in the old city outside the Jama Masjid kind of encapsulates what I'm talking about the importance of intimacy of the act of giving and sharing water. Now, these concerns in South Asia on water has been articulated for quite some time, but there's a watershed moment, and my apologies for all the watery metaphors, some of them will seep in, is this event that takes place in 1997 in Kandy in Sri Lanka, where different people, civil society groups, citizens come together from India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh to discuss about water and conflict. And the upshot of this conference, this workshop, is the manifesto that I want to present today, which is, I think, a very important document in post-colonial South Asia in terms of a reimagination of water or a vision for water articulated not by the state, but by intellectuals, researchers, practitioners, and ordinary citizens coming together. This is why this makes this manifesto so important. And the sad part is, and you must be realizing this for those of you who are kind of familiar with this or not, this is not a part of our discourse. Not many people know about this manifesto, and they should. So, this manifesto, which was titled Water, Power, and People, a South Asian manifesto on the politics and knowledge of water, finally, the synthesis was written by Imtiaz Ahmed from Bangladesh, Ajay Dikshit from Nepal, and Ashish Nandi from India. Just to point out, they're all born in different homes with different religions in different countries coming together. And I don't think it will be very easy to organize this kind of a convention in today's South Asia the way we could do in 1997, 50 years after India and Pakistan's independence. Now, a quick view of what were the key arguments that was being made in this document. One is that they basically argue that the fundamental problem of water in South Asia is that of governance. And it talks about the fact that this governance problem is situated in the problem of how development and developmentality has entered the space and discourse, and the uneven geographies it has produced, and the fact that the de-skilling of the rural was necessary for the growth of the urban. And that in turn creates these urban centers that perpetuates and produces new kinds of water problems in terms of sanitation and water pollution and many other things. So, and of course, the element that Nihal talked about, the colonial template of providing water to the privileged is retained in the post-colonial state. So the elites move into spaces which was earlier occupied by the colonial elite, and we don't change the structure. We continue perpetuating it. And we, I mean, the royal we should not be used, but basically talking about plural geographies here. So I just want to clarify that before someone picks up on that. And the second point that they make is the science and uncertainty and risk. Very important, especially if you look at what's happening with AI and this tremendous dependence on modeling of rivers that is taking place. I personally have no issues with modelers and modeling and data science. Now, data science is like this, it's like you bump into a data scientist every corner these days. But what I'm trying to argue here is in 1997, they pointed out something which remains today a serious concern, that your models are based on a disembodied understanding of data, that you are not really aware of how the data has been generated, how the data has been put into shape, and what is the political history of that data. There's a beautiful book about how this person collects rainwater. I'm sorry, I segueing, but they collects rainwater data in Cherrapunji, and it's a fantastic ethnography of how this data collection process works, and I'll share that link later. But data by itself, as an apolitical form of producing science, has to be questioned. And the science, uncertainty, and risk aspect kind of talk about it, reminding us that water cannot be understood primarily through the discipline of engineering, which was the dominant norm at that time in 1997, and it still is. It reminds us of the hubris of modern technology and global capital, which is again connected to the colonial, the aftermath of colonialism, and the fact that what Rohan D'Souza would call the supply side hydrology. Augment the supply irrespective of what you think the demand should be, and keep supplying more. So the city first gets water 20 kilometers away from it, then 300, 200, and now 500 kilometers. Supply side augmentation becomes the norm of colonial water supply and is carried on in the post-colonial state. It is done in a centralized manner. It is done in a command and control model that looks at water, as Nihal also pointed out, stripping it from its social context completely. In fact, Shonali Mitra and Rohan D'Souza in 2013 writes a piece in Seminar calling this the cubic megawatt river, because this is the only two units that define a river in the way planners think of it: volume and the potential of energy. Cubic megawatt river, and that's what they call the Ganga. Now, also the fact is that this global capital and its push is decided by the investors. It is not decided by the needs of the people, of what kind of water needs they aspire for. So obviously, 1997, there was a lot of discussion around dams at that time. Chipko had happened earlier in the 60s, and then Apikko had happened, and the Narmada movement was going on. And so dams take a very important position in this discussion in the manifesto. And here again, the question of the fact that we are replicating a colonial model of storage and control of water, which, as they point out in 1997, the Americans and the Europeans are moving away from, but we are replicating with such tremendous intensity. And they also point out that it is the classrooms in India that are champions of dams and not the classrooms of engineers in the West, which is revising their way of looking at the water. Today, room for the river is a serious matter in the Netherlands. While over here, there is no room for the river. On the contrary, how much room can you take away from the river is what the dominant paradigm is. So, and of course, the fact that there's a significant amount of displacement and violence, which produces these concerns of water and equity. And where is this violence directed? The violence is directed at the most marginalized groups of people, the Adivasis and the Dalits of India, who are regularly displaced from the places they inhabit and they call their home. And the important point I also want to make is Ashish Nandy contributes to an understanding of what kind of pathologies and what kind of psychological insecurities that produces when you displace people, the disconnection with land, the disconnection with home, and what kind of a new identity then has to be produced of a person who has lost their identity of the self because of the displacement. This is a very important thing that I think we don't get to talk about much. Now, of course, there's also the point of that, I don't want to get into too many details, but one thing I want to point out is the manifesto points to the connection between agriculture and water supply, saying that the Green Revolution pollution not only brings in thirsty crops, it produces thirsty soils. And both thirsty crop and thirsty soil then needs more supply side augmentation. Today, if you look at Punjab and what's happening to the soils of that area, you realize that this basically lost all ability to hold water. So this aspect of water insecurity at the cost of water and who bears that cost. Finally, they ask for a deep, and it's not a diagnostic, it's also actually a prognosis, the manifesto. It talks about the problems and also gives you a vision to work towards. It talks about the need to move away from state centric models of water towards centering it around people and communities. And it also talks about, and this is very important, denationalizing water. In today's context, such an important thing to talk about, where it argues that water has become a national and a state property, which allows it by default to create the argument of national security around water. And when water becomes a national security, what Nihal was talking about, the the importance of connecting geographies, the civilizational connect between people through water is no longer possible because the European nation state now impedes that solidarity building. It comes in the way because now you're a national security threat if you're critiquing or trying to block a dam coming up in your neighborhood. And this is something Kuntala Lahiri Dutt pointed out in an exchange on LinkedIn, and I completely agree with her. It was one of the first time river rights is being mentioned in South Asia. Look, if you look into the history of river rights and the literature, you will be usually taken to the 1972 discussions in the US and the Supreme Court judgment. But the fact that in 1997 the manifesto is talking about giving and codifying and guaranteeing the rights of a river as independent agencies is as an independent entity is a remarkable accomplishment. So this also comes true in the manifesto, and I hope scholars and young academics who are there in this talk would engage with this aspect of it and bring this to the foreground. And finally, it talks about the need for an integrative vision, where and this is something Ajay and I have written together later. And by the way, each of them are such remarkable human beings. Ajay is such a warm person to talk to, and he's always encouraging young scholars. They epitomize the water ethic of the time, and we are very glad to have such giants on which whose shoulders we stand when we speak today. So Ajay talked about the need to move away from land centric aspects of water towards a more water centric understanding of water, because the whole model of development is built on the idea that we need to displace water to claim land. Land is necessary for revenue generation and colonial profit, and that is precisely the argument that continues in the post colonial phase, where we are constantly trying to push water away to reclaim land. That itself has caused so much problems across the subcontinent that we know of. Now, given this context of the manifesto, if you look at this map right now, I ask you, it's a provocation. Is this a post colonial or colonial water? Because for me, the line starts to blur. I do not understand how the way we are violating rivers at this intensity in India, 6,300 dams, large and major, are already in place. What kind of hydrology are we talking about here? What is a river anymore in South Asia? I ask you, because there is nothing that's free flowing anymore. And today we have gone from not only mutilating rivers and treating it like plumbing lines, we are talking about connecting them as grids as if they're plumbing pipes. So this plumbing of rivers has been enabled because we've basically decided that rivers and water systems can be visualized, imagined outside the social contract, outside the cosmology, outside the cultural imaginations around it, and outside the livelihood systems they support for the poor and the marginalized. This is a vision that's coming from a very different place. So where exactly is it coming from? Now, in this conversation in 1997, and the Imtiaz Ahmed and Ajay Dikshit get together, and they come across this a little quirky, but I really like it. Conceptualization of water as H2OP4, saying that water is never water. And there's been a lot of discussions, and you can look into the whole the politics of how we look and understand water. There's a history of science work that's done by Hasok Chang. There's Ivan Illich's separation of H2 and water, which is a remarkable and a seminal text for us. But what they talk about, Ajay Dikshit and Imtiaz Ahmed, is to look at H2O as H2OP4, where, as they put it, P4 is pollution, power, profit, and politics. And this is something I want to build on in the last segment of my presentation. So when I put this image forward of pollution, the first P, I want to ask you, what are you thinking of? Every year in India, this is Yamuna that passes through the city of Delhi. It is the most polluted city in the world. This is Chhat Puja, a ritual, a practice, a religious practice of praying to the sun god, largely practiced by people from Purvanchal, which is eastern UP and Bihar. And every year, people immerse themselves in this water that's full of volatile organic compounds, pollutants, biological, chemical, surfactants, and they pray to nature. Now, a simple secular understanding of this would be people don't know science, they're not educated, we need to do something about this. But I ask you to probe this a little deeper and ask ourselves, what is this belief and faith that actually separates us from our embodied feeling of pollution? Because every year people come out from these rivers with, skin rashes and all kinds of problems. How do we separate this where we feel the water to be still clean when we immerse ourselves in it? Is it just, can we rely on secularized narratives? Do we really need to understand then how people construct the world around them? And here is also a provocation, a political provocation. Can this then become a way for us to engage with religion to say, people from Purvanchal will not vote for any party that cannot clean the Yamuna River? Can that be a possibility that can emerge? So I'm just trying to tweak it around. I know it's not easy, but why not imagine? Next, profit. This picture is from my fieldwork in Gujarat where I was doing my PhD. This is an area so arid in Bhuj. You can look around and you can see the growth of Prosopis juliflora all around that indicates. And right in the middle of that is that advertisement talking about a entire residential compound with a swimming pool that's shaped like a guitar. How do these aspirations come into the picture? Where is profit? Where do you now account for the aspirations of the middle class in the way we understand post colonial water? This is a significant question that we have to ask ourselves because our aspiration is not based on aesthetics anymore, because that aesthetics, and Nihal knows this better than me, is coming from different geographies, which has also been corrupted and perverted by the European experience in some form or the other, and neoliberalism. But what does this aspiration generate? And for example, P. Sainath did a great job of talking about that one apartment block which had a swimming floor in each floor, and they stopped filling up the swimming floors because of him. So good job for that happened. But this question of profit remains at the core of how we look at water in South Asia today. Aspiration of the middle class. How do we engage with that? How we deal with this? And how much research we need? Because the middle classes are not being researched for water. We keep going back to the poor and understanding their challenges, but what are the middle classes up to? Finally, power. The post-colonial engineering state has, by the way, I think, yeah, okay, cool. So the post-colonial engineering state, sorry, oops, yeah, these are the key actors of irrigation infrastructure and dam building and hydraulics in post-colonial India. K.L. Rao, Gangaram, Vishweswaraya. K.L. Rao in 1960s is talking about correcting the entire country as a grid, right? So these are mostly people who have been trained in engineering abroad. And they are continuing the colonial legacy not only in their practice but also in the curriculum of engineering. If you go into engineering trades, schools today that teaches hydraulics, they're still talking about river training, something which is unthinkable at a time like this where you're talking about ecological functions of the river. So the fact is, and this is what I want to talk about, which I'll take a little more time. There is a need to recognize how Brahminism intersects with colonial modes of knowledge production. I think we have not probed this enough in South Asia. Because what I believe, and this have been working for some time, so so I'm happy to talk about it in detail later. It is for the first time that upper caste and especially Brahmins use colonial forms of education like engineering to enter the domain of practice. Usually, Brahmins are not connected to questions of labor. If you are building something, a Brahmin doesn't come and tell you how to build. If you are practicing farming, a Brahmin doesn't come and tell you how to farm. But for the first time, an agricultural scientist can tell the farmer how to farm. And that agricultural scientist is usually a Brahmin. The engineer now tells you how the river should move, not the fisher folk. There is a huge transition that's taking place where Brahminical patriarchy and Brahminical understanding of knowledge is slowly taking over the colonial infrastructure of knowledge production. This is a very important aspect why it is so hard to unsettle these modes of knowledge production and its application in the subcontinent. So this I wanted to talk about, and this is my addition to what the manifesto talks about, that we need to recognize the caste-based production of knowledge and science in the subcontinent and how it entrenches inequality. Finally, the politics, and I just want to get into the fact that this is a very sad story of what's happening to sugarcane workers of Maharashtra, where a large number of them, for example, in Beed district, they are being forced into hysterectomy so they can work in the sugarcane plantations. We are growing sugarcane in the driest region of the country, which is under a drought-prone area program, and we are exhausting groundwater aquifers, and the exhaustion of aquifers is not separate from the exploitation of labor. Plantations have this history. This is the colonial mode that replicating itself in Maharashtra, and this politics that allows for this also needs to be scrutinized when we look into the post-colonial state of water in South Asia. But it's all, I don't want to end this with hopelessness. This is what has always given me hope from a very early time in my career. The East Kolkata wetlands, you're looking at it from the side of the city, a vast waterscape that has been in existence from the 1920s that repurposes, reworks, and in a strange and beautiful alchemy, converts the wastewater of the city into fish and food for its cities. Dhruvadyoti Ghosh used to call this Kolkata the ecologically subsidized city, where the poor subsidize the rich by catalyzing waste, but in the process, they also generate a very respectable livelihoods for themselves. So this hope, this is I'm connecting with Nihal here. Hope will come from the margins. And this is what we need to get into in understanding subaltern practices and their ways of looking at the world. So then I want to say that H2PO4, H2OP4, why not make it H2OP5? P for the last contribution would be people. And there are 5 points I want to close this with. One, the act of displacement that takes place through water engineering silences the river. When the fisher folk are no longer on the river, there's no one to speak for that river. So there's an act of active silencing taking place in the colonial modes of engineering water bodies in South Asia. We must learn how to see water from the margins. It gives a completely different view, and we must learn to do that. To quote Gayatri Spivak, learn to learn from below. We need to liberate colonial engineering, but also from the Savarna case, because Brahminical patriarchy also shapes our way of looking at the water, and we need to rethink how we can unsettle that. Colonial part to unsettle that way of thinking is one part of the story, but unsettling Brahminical patriarchy is another. And we also need to review the romanticized notion of commons. When caste enters commons, and the Mahat Satyagraha by B.R. Ambedkar proves what exactly is a commons when you bring caste into the equation, especially in India, Pakistan, and Nepal. How do you negotiate that? So those understanding of commons that we have, we also need to revisit it. And the final question is, going back to the image I started with, let's bring back a reverence for water. And that can be done. And this is where Nihal and I completely agree. We need to rethink our aesthetics of water. Modernity has robbed us of our aesthetics. And if we find a way to revive our reverence for water, it will happen through the aesthetics, through the beautiful other large tanks and other forms of remarkable water harvesting structures that tell us something important. People respect water when you respect the way it is supplied to you. So that's my pitch. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Amitanshu, for this power-packed, I will just put 4 words from your presentation and how things have changed over time. We saw it in the perspective of South Asia, and now getting into what's going on in India and the whole dynamics of power, profit, politics, people, and of course, an outcome of it is, one of the outcomes is pollution itself, but caste being there for a long, long time. I actually wish to open the floor for questions, but before I invite our participants to raise questions, I also wish to share with all of you that we had a discussion, three of us. We wanted to do this session on decolonization, and then we settled with post-colonization. So I would like both of you to really give some prompts to all, because you see most of our participants are also young people. How do we decouple decolonization and post-colonization? And then it actually helps us to see why did we settle with post-colonial discussion instead of decolonization discussion. Over to you, Nihal, and then maybe I invite Stuti to have her questions after they have responded. Yeah.
Sure. So for me, as I figured out in my own work, I figured out Ceylon, India, all these things were produced through colonialism. I mean, there's none of these existed before the Europeans. Although we try to push it back thousands of years, right? So the biggest impact of colonialism is not military takeover, it's not economic subjugation or connection, it's actually epistemic at the end of the day. The colonized people think like the colonials, or in a negotiated way, of course, they can think like the colonials. So that colonial thinking, I mean, as Amitanshu very well kind of like illustrated, continues. And then he also asked this question about how the caste comes into play and all these things, which I'm not going to go into. So then as I was exploring possibilities, like of questioning this or reacting to this, because I mean, I used to be a good scientist and a mathematician and all these things and a dualistic thinker, right? So it became obvious that despite the great discourse called decolonizing, you can't just strip colonialism. Because we were born, we went to school, we are colonized. I mean, even when Amitanshu talked about, oh, these people are like bathing in dirty water or whatever, then we actually draw on the colonial knowledge, because there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like this is bad and we are good, because that's exactly what they said. They were good and we were bad. So if we turn it around, we become like them. It's like if somebody hits me, I don't like it. If I hit back, then I become like the enemy. So for me, looking at the decolonial discourse that comes out of Latin America, I'm a little skeptical of that, because also partly because Quijano and so on. I mean, I used to know them from my previous Marxist discourse. I mean, who were oppositional to capitalism, oppositional, so. So I can't remember the guy who leads now. But I think I'm more in line with Guha and Chakravarti, and Gayatri Spivak and that group, which kind of say highlights that we can't just escape. It's a constant process of negotiation, and so on. So I think post-colonial is the way to go about. I think, and when I look at it, although I mean, there's another question. I'll respond to that during that time. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Sure.
And as Amitanshu said, it's learning to learn from the ordinary people. For me, I call it them ordinary people, the subalterns, you can call them. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a very interesting line which came up, that a hope is from the marginalized. And the fact that all of us sitting here talking about it are actually so normalized with colonized way of looking at things, it also extremely challenging and probably a paradoxical situation, that how do we decolonize ourselves even to talk about post-colonial, or whether we need decolonization or not require, because it needs to first then discuss what exactly colonialization did. What's your take? Why did we really settle, three of us, with not decolonizing but post-colonial? Is this something that we fancy, to go back to some roots which we had, or what is it? Why do we always look at colonialism with this negative connotation, whereas we have embraced, or we have kind of internalized it or normalized it in our everyday learning?
So thank you. And this is very useful conversation to have. I think what I see it as is it's not important to kind of look at how we label our
Hmm.
position on this. And I think by ascribing to a particular school, first of all, each of these schools have a particular historical trajectory. The
Hmm.
decolonial school comes from, as Nihal pointed out, from South America or Abiyala, and while the post-colonial has its roots in West Asia and South Asia in a big way, like Edward Said being one of the,
Yes.
and then of course the others from South Asia. So the question here is, what is our position? What kind of position are we articulating when we say post-colonial? I think first of all, we are
Hmm.
recognizing that we are in this context of hybridity. And this is
Hmm.
exactly what Nihal's and my our discussion was trying to point at, that there is a hybridity here where we are not saying, which is a big slippage we should avoid, pre-coloniality is not decoloniality. In India, if
Yes.
you go to pre-coloniality, you get money. So you don't
Hmm.
want that. So now the point here is, in post-colonial, what we are recognizing is that the colonial is very much a present in our everyday lives and the way we look
Hmm.
at the world. And the question is, how do we unsettle them for our understanding of collective well-being? What
Hmm.
kind of values do we need to engage with from the past? The past has to be critically engaged with in post-colonial thinking.
Yes.
We don't unsuspectingly or unhesitatingly engage with the past. We engage with it critically, and we have to then situate it in the realities of the time and then see where we want to go from here. So
Hmm.
this is the danger that's happening in the subcontinent, where
Hmm.
the appropriation of the decolonial logic that's currently happening in India prefers us to go back into that past, which allows for a particular supremacist invention
Hmm.
of geography, which we do not want to engage with. So I think this is why
Yeah.
perhaps we didn't want to use the term, and yeah.
Yes, I think that is important to share with everyone, because we had good round of deliberation on it. Stuti, over to you. Yes, then Anup.
Thank you so much for the awesome session. It was so enlightening. I'm literally having goosebumps. Thank you, Nihalji and Amitanshanji. It is really thought provoking. And Amitanshu closed it with a very powerful note that you respect water as the way it is transported to you. It is so important, and that is why I think you guys are talking about colonialization and pre-colonization and decolonization, whatever it is. It is because there was a respect for water, which we see people throwing water. Earlier, we never saw people wasting water. It was precious, but now because it is so readily available in bottles and everywhere, so that is why the respect I feel. I remember my grandparents used to circumambulate the water like this around the thalis and the food, because it was respected. It is to purify. But I have a question. I have a question for, because the first session was for Nihal. It was, what is meant by authorized discourse in the context of water management? You just mentioned that. So if you could just elaborate on that, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Nihal.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay. Can I make two comments about what Amitanshu said? Like to add
Yeah,
something?
please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I think to add to, like, I think we see eye to eye. So this is fantastic, Amitanshu, to meet you here, and thanks for Mansi to bringing us together. Actually, it's more than, I mean, I think, like what we are trying through post-colonial is not to be oppositional, but to be self-critical. Rather than sort of like fighting
Well
fighting
put.
somebody and say you are wrong and we are right, and also our history is so great, to see, like, what is our privilege. I mean, to begin to unlearn, like, and question and unlearn. ourselves, like, in that sense. So if I may add a couple of things to what Amitanshu said, I'm a little excited, Amitanshu. So sorry about this.
This is how these sessions go, by the way.
Yeah.
By the time we are
So
towards
yeah,
closure.
so
Yeah.
I remember Mansi when during Cappacia, like my students would go to Indian places and they would give water, and my students will not drink water because in India you can get stomach aches and who knows, you can die. So everywhere you go you get water. I mean, this is very interesting to kind of like see this connection, because it's
Yes.
the, I mean, Stuti, in a way, this is the dominant discourse or the authorized discourse. Like you go to these places, you're not supposed to drink water, or anything. If you drink water, you can drink aerated waters, bottled water, or beer. Okay. And I used to be the chief architect plan of the largest development project in Sri Lanka before I went to do my PhD. It was the Mahaveli project, dammed in so many places. The myth they sold us was like, when you dam this longest river, so the problem is kind of like floods and droughts. So when we dam this, this is something I believed, as a science buff, like at some point, that you can collect all the water during the rainy season, and then you can gradually kind of like let the water flow, so there'll be no droughts. I mean, it's a very big control mechanism. No droughts, no floods, right? And I soon realized this is all BS, and so on. So, Stuti, the authorized discourse means the expert judgment, basically. Like, I mean, as Amitanshu pointed out, we actually we know. Sorry, something wrong. Say, for example, we go to universities and we learn and we know about water better than anybody else, about forests better than anybody else, better than the people who live in the forest. We know about the coast better than the people who live on the coast, like so on. I mean, so this is a kind of an elite formation, but it's a pseudo elite. It's not Brahmins. It's just like people who work for them, right? And so like for example, there was a big tsunami in Sri Lanka. I mean, you guys know, in 2024 December.
Yes.
And then the decision was easy. All people will be shifted at least 100 meters from the water. You can make this decision from Colombo or from New York. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be there. So what happened? There's no land waiting for them to move, right, 100 meters away. So they were moved 5 kilometers away. And who were these people? Fishermen, right? So now fishermen has to come to work on a daily basis to the beach, right? And they wouldn't, like, I mean, I think they did, but then they are living in a different place. Now their kids will not play with the fishing implements and so on. So what is happening to the whole fishing industry? Like, I mean, I'm not saying that the fisherman's son should be a fisherman. What I'm saying is, so this knowledge is a very different type of a knowledge, scientific structured knowledge, which is far from ordinary people. And we make judgments, and we say that this is what we should preserve, and nowadays there's a fort that is preserved in southern Sri Lanka to the Dutch period, right? So they say Dutch created this fort, and then people who were living there were all displaced because they can't afford anymore. They have a lot of rules to kind of like play by, and so on. So this is what is meant by that, the expert judgment, but it's propagated via international charters. I'm repeating what I said: international charters, global conventions, urban plans, formal education systems, right? And then we go to conferences and we build upon it, right? In some ways, but we marginalize, as I showed the organic spaces, cultural meanings we discussed all along in this, historical memories, right? Daily practices and voices of ordinary people. I mean, this is exactly why, like, in a way, among other things, Amitanshu and I are saying, like, let's go to, because colonialism also did not hit the ends. Nothing is complete. Colonialism was never complete. So people in the margins, it's not that they were never colonized, but colonialism hit in a very different way. They have daily realities, so maybe there's a lot that we can learn from them, right? So that's the expert judgment.
Yeah. Now I think we will have to start pressing both our questions, participants and speakers to be very precise, because now
Correct,
we
yeah.
start countdown.
Okay.
Yes, Amitanshu, you want to answer her the second question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So quickly getting to that, Stuti, is that what I meant is that you meant how and why does data modeling potentially ignore the point is abstraction.
Hmm.
Data that is gathered for putting into models are abstracted, and this abstraction is achieved through instrumentation. Instruments are supposed to collect data and then feed into a model. Now, the reality, the social reality of water in those landscapes are not something instruments are meant to capture, right? So just to give you an example, if you go to the floodplains of Bihar, and my research was around Gandak River, the flow of water and how the sluice gates operates is based on landholding and conflicts between farmers, and not necessarily how much rain fell and how much flowed through the channels. But this antiseptic understanding is what goes into these machines and then appears on our models. And then if you create a flood prediction model based on that understanding, you're completely making you're creating a different world, you're imagining a different world. So that's what I meant by that.
Hmm. And I think it also resonates with what Nihal was saying, that with the cyclone, tsunami, that you just move people by 100 meters. There's something can come from anywhere in the world. Anup, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the outstanding presentations. I am sorry I don't have any questions today, but I wanted to put a certain thought that came in when Amitanshu sir added P5, the people. So if you know that Water Manifesto came in 1997, but if I'm not wrong, just a just a decade before that, the subaltern scholarship has kept growing. So when I'm looking at a subaltern scholarship, I found that the perfect vocabulary, that is consciousness. So for example, Spivak also talks of the subaltern consciousness, people, power in the people. And also Dipesh Chakraborty also talked of the subaltern consciousness, the peasant's consciousness. So when I read the Water Manifesto, so I found that there is certain consciousness it actually grows in when I'm reading the Water Manifesto. But what I actually have found that it has not well developed. It's not maybe conceptualized. Maybe it's actually growing. So I mean, my question is, where do we stand? Because it's been a long time since Water Manifesto came in, but we're not working on it. Even Amitanshu sir rightly pointed out, we are missing it in a lot of discourses. We haven't seen the citations that is missing that Water Manifesto. So why not we are not thinking that why we can't develop and conceptualize or define water consciousness? I mean, Water Manifesto is the entry point. So just a random thought that I wanted to put in, because I am working on subaltern scholarship. Also, I'm thinking water consciousness for a long time. So that's why I'm just thinking that how is going on. Yeah.
This is Nihal, would you want to take this?
No.
This will
It's about
take
the
some
manifesto.
wanted to
unpacking.
make a point actually, and but
Yeah.
he ended up having
No,
a
no, I'm
question.
just so I'll know Anup is a deep thinker, so I have to really
Okay.
kind
Yeah,
of
I know.
wrap my
We
head
have a
around
serious
this.
person here.
So I think Anup, I think first of all, the manifesto was always supposed to be a work in progress. All manifestos
Yeah,
are work in
all.
progress, right? So now the question is, how do we see it from today's perspective? And it's very true that the manifesto is a product not only of environmental movements of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, it's also a product of emerging theorizations like subaltern studies. So you're absolutely right on that. The question is, where does subaltern agency sit in the presence of hegemonic post-colonial state? This is something that we have not managed to really unpack. And to what extent does that agency allow for its own world building in South Asia, and what scale? Because we are always told about Hivre Bazaar as a watershed model that happened. We are talked about various villages where people have become like they have done water management, and if you're talking water consciousness, it'd be interesting to see how you see those subaltern experiments in that light, right? So there is a lot of potential there to take that theorization and look at these sites of community-based management. Vilas Rao Salunke's work in Maharashtra, for example, right? So where is water consciousness there? Because he separates land rights from water rights and basically hands landless laborers and landless farmers also water share, which they could then trade. So what kind of water consciousness is emerging from those kinds of tinkering and solution making spaces? What kind of subaltern agencies are being shaped would be a very interesting area to look into. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll now have Zeba Ahsan to ask question, but before that, please open your video camera so that we don't have a black box, and then Radhika. I think we don't have any more questions here, so we'll close it with Radhika's question. Zeba.
Yeah, hi, good evening. So this was a very enriching session. I mean, very forward thinking, very deep thinking, and sort of provided me a lot of food, fuel, and fodder for thought. So my question is for Mr. Nihal. So the thing is, there has been a surge of real estate development across South Asian cities, and it is often marketed as development in the wake of rising aspirations. But that directly puts a lot of pressure on your surface and groundwater resources. And in this whole process, we have a lot of soaring prices, which affects practically everything and anything. So that also is a post-colonial issue. And in the context of India, Bangalore is the best example, right? With encroachment of wetlands. And I think it's also the city which pays the highest water tax. So I just want to tailor down the question because I'm assuming Sri Lanka also faces something similar. So could you please reflect on something similar on these lines for Colombo and how it has impacted the actual developmental pursuits?
I don't think I got it properly.
No, I'm saying that,
There's pressure on groundwater. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, sorry.
So,
Go
like,
ahead.
how has real estate development taken place, maybe in a city or like Colombo, and what is the scene with gentrification there, and how it has impacted communities?
I have studied this so-called gentrification that you're talking about, and more I study about that, it becomes very clear that we cannot actually apply those concepts which are like very Western concepts. Why do I say Western? It's because it is a market mechanism that Ruth Glass and I can't even remember the other one, Neil Smith, they talk about. Actually, there's a special issue of International Journal of Urban and Regional Research that was done, actually edited by my friend who passed away last year, uh, claiming that Hong Kong is not gentrified. Actually, it's you can't use that word because it's very different. It's a different phenomenon. So we can't just pluck concepts from the West, which he called random appropriation of concepts. But we need to develop, what these are. As I begin to investigate what happened in Colombo, which was like as you were saying, huge real estate development and so on in the during the Rajapaksa era. Actually, it relates to another political phenomenon called kleptocracy. I mean, this happens in the United States and so on. And then I don't want to go into huge details, but I'll make 2 points, like two aspects of that. Like people trying to be dictators like Trump, like, I mean, saying, oh, I don't believe in elections and so on. I mean, you see this in India, Sri Lanka, I mean, all these places. So how could we actually even talk about this, But I don't think we can actually use those. So in a different sense, this is happening, and all the stuff like the pressures that you're talking about is happening. But I don't think we can just pluck some concept from the West. But in my case, I don't have like a fully developed response to give you.
Also, I think we can discuss it further, because Zeba, you are also our future speaker, because she is attending today to understand how things go. Maybe because you are going to talk about Assam floods, you can actually bring the whole idea how marginalization happens in relief works and all. We'll have time to do that. Radhika, also our ex-speaker and a very dear friend. Over to you, Radhika, and face of W4W as well for a long time. Yes.
Thank you
Go
so
ahead.
much, Mansi. I right now I separate out. I'm just feeling very emotional. So, anyways, thank you so much to both the speakers for this very beautiful talk. I actually have a question about the rights of rivers point which was made, and bringing it to the latest update in India from Chennai, where Tamira Barani
Yes.
River has been given identity of a legal entity, but by stating that the river is a goddess and using religion as the reason for why she should be treated as a living entity, and not because a river is a river. So I just wanted to understand. Yeah, I just wanted to understand how do we look at this, because rights of river is talking about ecology and biodiversity and river as a living system, but now we have religion playing a main role into this. How do we post-colonial, decolonial break it? I don't know.
Amitangshu, I think you can hit it. Yes.
No, I think so. I know, Radhika, that's a very valid point, and I think this is where my concern around rights of or rivers also comes from, because I have been wary about it, because in a post-colonial state where the rights of indigenous people are not being actualized within constitutional provisions, what is the future of river rights is a big question. So for me, the question of rights for rivers is directly entangled with the question of the livelihoods rights of the people who depend upon it. Okay, so now the problem emerges is what mechanisms are being used to get rights for the river, how inclusive it is. And now, if this is not inclusive, then it is not decolonial or post-colonial either, because the critical aspect of either forms of thinking or anti-colonial thinking is to make an approach inclusive, is not to bring supremacist thinking into forms of organizing society nature relationships. So as a result, if rights for river discussions are taking place in India, we need to critically approach them and look at it from the perspective of the lives of the marginalized connected to those rivers, and how do they see those rivers. This is what Nihal and I have been talking about: practice and the margins. These should be the pillars on which these rights should be actualized. So I have noticed this all my career, Radhika. The moment a dam comes into the landscape, the first thing they do is they first kick out all the poor people whose lives are dependent on the river, because after that, the river has been silenced. The river doesn't speak for itself. It speaks to the voice of the marginalized who live and they get their livelihoods from it. So this is a very clear plan. Same with forests and conservation parks. Once you throw out the Adivasis from that area, who speaks for the forest? So unless we start bringing in this aspect of the livelihoods and the rights of the marginalized into the discussion of the rights of rivers, it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, interestingly, I have to now reveal the secret, because I am trying to get Amit Bhatnagar ji to do the bumper show for the Chita Andolan, which is going on, but he's on and off ICU and jail. So I don't know how do I get him. but I'm constantly in touch with his colleagues to talk to him. Very well put. And actually, Amitangshu, you were also talking about it in your during your presentation, that decolonial, or looking at reflecting on colonialism in a different way, also has a risk of this Brahmanical and Savarna way of looking at things. And religion itself, putting a tag of religion, is equally dangerous. So we don't want to go back to the same old that we had, to say that the new is not good. And there is a risk lying there. I think what has happened in Tamil Nadu, we also saw earlier in Ganga, which was for ecosystem, not for religion, which was later scrapped. And now we are actually in that radar to look at how Tamil Nadu is going to look through river as a goddess. Let me just take Niroshion Pereira. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Please go ahead. And
Mansi, can I quickly add a point to what you said?
Go ahead.
Because I think this topic that
topics,
Radhika has put up is very complex. I am also very Radhika of secularizing these narratives, okay? Because if we really look at it purely from that perspective of we should include ecosystems and non-humans and rights of non-humans, then we are also missing out on the other part of the picture, which is understanding the spiritual and religious connections. The question is, can you make those spiritual and religious connections more inclusive is also a challenge. But to take that out of the room and talk about rights of rivers with is not simply not going to work. So we need both, and that's what makes it more challenging. Yeah, sorry.
And actually it is happening because we see Hasdeo Forest, the whole movement is completely crushed. We are seeing the Chita Andolan crushed. We are seeing Medha Tai fighting for 40 years, more than 40 years now. So, I mean, when we talk about rights of rivers without the rights of the people, there is already some kind of, this colonialism in practice as well. I see some hands raised. I know people are getting, this is usually the case in Wednesdays for Water. By the time we are closing, we have more questions. But I will give Yubraj an option to question, because he's also, they're running Fluverine, which is a young people's water conversation. So Yubraj.
Thank you, Mansi ma'am.
From Nepal, right? If I remember correctly.
No, I'm from Assam.
You are from Assam. Very good. And I hope everyone in your family and friends are safe. Go ahead.
Like, I had this one observation which I'm noticing from some time back in my state, and also in in Arunachal. This idea of populism and the idea of dam. So I have been noticing few things which is been going on. One, when a dam is about to come in or about to take place, or in a proposed place, there is also this idea which is very simultaneously coming with the dam, is also a temple near the dam site. So in many of the dam site, there are also temples. Similarly, in the Ladakh region, where there are a lot of solar plants, there are also temples coming in. So how this idea of populism, idea of religion is also very connected to the idea of dam, and through it justify the idea of dam. So I've been noticing this trend, and I don't know, one of the points which Amitangshu also read is about from the Water Manifesto is also about the denationalizations of the dam. But through this process, it is also creating new kind of imaginaries through which dam also become accepted to the people, and also for the state to justify the dam. This is just a small observation from my side. Thanks.
Small observation and deep concerns when even Ganga becomes for Hindus, and some people are beaten up because they don't belong to Hindu community. These are really, really deep questions. But Niroshion Pereira, are you available, or if you can really check if you want to answer any of these two points in the chat box, both Amitangshu or Nihal, maybe last word. And Stuti, I will have to escape. I see your hand raised. I think it is from the beginning, so I'm removing your hand raised. And do you want to respond to the 2 points there from Stacy and Niroshion Pereira? Any one of you in the chat box? Stacy, you want to add something by voice, or you are happy with your chat box message?
There's information.
Well,
Water governance.
actually, I don't have anything to add on that, but that was actually my main question. Yeah.
So we will have Africa session soon with you and Hans on board with W4W. Okay, So
I think for Stacy, I mean, Niroshan has made a point, and I do
yes.
agree. For Stacy, I would be very careful to generalize anything, because I mean, whatever I'm seeing in, I mean, I have quite a bit of experience. Amitanshu has a lot of experience, but the thing is, when you go to a different environment, it's different, right? Because at the end of the day, as Amitanshu said, once you remove the people who are living with the river, then river is a different thing, right? So the thing is, I think we need to understand the ecosystem, to put it that way, right? I mean, I don't know whether that's the right word, but and so on. So I wouldn't actually try to generalize anything that we said, in some ways, to Africa, which is a very different place. To begin with, this is exactly what the colonials did, right? As post-colonial scholars, on the other hand, we can actually learn. For me, what we can learn is more the process than the product, because we are so used to learning knowledge. Actually, we need to learn from the knowledge, right? Say for example, I mean, sometimes people import, in Sri Lanka also they do that. They import the Garden City plan. You can't import the Garden City plan, because Garden City plan was made in response to a very particular situation in the UK. Industrialization and people dying, and pollution and so on. But the same situation was responded to in Paris in a different way, by getting rid of the factories and the workers from the city, right? So there are many different ways. I think rather than, I mean, the easiest common thing across the world is everybody talks about Marxism, and they don't want to change anything Marx said in the 1800s. So this is an insult to Marx, because if Marx is living now in Sri Lanka or India in the 21st century, he would not tell the same thing. I mean, why do we think he's an idiot?
In fact, he didn't do.
Yeah,
When he was
found
alive
something and
also
he
at the
said.
end.
So we need to explore, and I'm sure Amitanshu and everybody will be very happy to collaborate, cooperate, to and attain to this. But I also want to make one quick point about the subaltern. Like we talked about subaltern and subaltern agency, but I think subaltern is also very, catchy word, I mean, it's a catchphrase, but also at the same time, it's a very difficult thing, because subalterns don't have a voice. Once they have a voice, they're not subalterns, right? And there's no one group called subalterns. Subalterns are everywhere. It's like the informal. There's no one informal, but formal is there's one, right? So one formal, others the other, and sort of like talks about the informal. Similarly, subalterns are like many, and so on. It depends on the place. Once a subaltern gets the voice, it's not a subaltern, like in some ways. So for me, I mean, I don't know how to there's no thing to resolve, but we have no ability to analyze. I think, once we can analyze, they become different. So just to make a open point there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Amitanshu, any last line or words you have to say? Otherwise, I do the vote of thanks now.
No, I just wanted to tell Stacy that, I'll get back to a point that Anupam Mishra told me, who was a legendary, writer and commentator on Indian water traditions. He said that, in the past, there were always exchange of water knowledge taking place along the Silk Route, along the trade routes. There was always information being exchanged. What was being exported was basically what people could contextualize and make it work. While in current format, all models are pushed by certain power structures and vested interests, which is not dependent on how things work, but what kind of profit can be derived from replicating the model. So there's a huge difference in how we are looking at exchange of knowledge and things like, for example, the Dubaification of all airports. All
Yes.
airports now look the same. how did that happen, and how was it that if you go back in the 16th and 17th century, each port looked different in the world if you stopped your ship? So the issue here is difference, and contextualization based on what works is different from what actually allows profit to proliferate. And I think this is where we need to start distinguishing how we can structure knowledge exchange across different geographies.
I think this is also a point where we realize that we need more discussions on it. So maybe more times. So thank you so much, both Nihal and Amitangshu, and thanks a lot all the youth here who have really listened patiently and also asked wonderful questions and engaged with both of our speakers, which is the whole idea of Wednesdays for Water and W4W Foundation, that water conversations must flow just the way we would like water to flow. We continue. We are actually booked until December 1st week. That already tells us that we need more water conversations. And I feel that we need one more round of decolonization, post-colonization. Next week, August 19th at 3 p.m. IST, because we again go to 3 time zones. We have actually New Zealand coming in picture next week. So we have to have a little bit earlier. So please mind the time zone. We are discussing challenging false climate solutions for Himalayan water future, which will be part of the water anxiety series, which we are running. All the details will be there on www.w4w.org, our new home. We thank you once again for your support and encouragement to make us one of the longest water conversations in the world, and connecting all of us together. As you saw today, these two gentlemen, young gentlemen, I must say, not knowing each other, but I'm sure they are going to flow together for a long, long time from here on. And that's what we have been doing. Water connects, and the water conversations is something that connects all of us. Stay tuned with us, and please take care of yourself. Thank you so much, and wish all of you in India Happy Independence Day. We will come with a great surprise, hopefully, if Amit Bhatnagar ji is available on this Friday. Thank you so much, all of you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making this happen. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Amit.